Sometimes how ornate the grandfather clock is, the pendulum draws the eye. Is your, what, the scenario being you're frightened of
Well,
her?
she'd threatened to have a stroke just before that.
Fern had already called you Dafty in the middle before the task sabotage even started.
When you get a group of contestants to do numerous insane tasks, not everything is going to be as streamlined as it may seem. Instead, let's chat about the 5 biggest twists, from heartbreak to sheer comedy, that the show Taskmaster gave us. Perhaps the most iconic twist in Taskmaster is Potato Gate, the moment where this happy young man devolved into this.
Please don't take it away from me.
This happened in the first episode of Series 2 and allowed the new series to start with a bang. This task is extremely simple. The contestants were given a potato because UK and had to throw it into a hole, but couldn't touch the red green encircling it. As a result, we had a lot of inventive strategies. Richard Osman created a Frankenstein bridge fit for a giant that allowed him to score the potato. Catherine created her own sport, John did some crochet, but that was only to be topped by Doc and his ever-evolving invention, with something new being sellotaped to his device every minute. If there was anything we've learned from the prior 4 attempts, is that you should not throw your potato directly for the hole until Joe Wilkinson arrived.
What about if I don't get it? There we go.
In an insane feat of luck, but a little bit of skill, Joe scored it in his first try and completely broke expectations. Greg interviews Joe about how amazing his throw was. Joe tells the audience how amazing his throw was, only for Greg to ask the audience if they want to rewatch how amazing Joe's throw was.
That's joyous.
With some crafty editing, Joe's moment of glory turns into realization. He crossed the red-green and therefore lost the task. In spite of Greg taking a vote, John and Doc both eventually refused to give him the 5 points.
Raise your hand if you'd like Joe to win, despite the...
These tasks are also filmed weeks upon weeks in advance, so unlike Nish's basketball in Season 5, Joe genuinely believed he had won and done that task. If that wasn't bad enough, for the prior prize task, Joe put up his wedding certificate on the line for the winner of the episode, which after that performance wouldn't be him. We brought him up previously, but we're bouncing past the basketball antics in exchange for Nish and Mark in the Series 5 Episode 2 Caravan Dilemma. I don't know how they came up with this task, but essentially the contestants had to take one item with them into the lab and use it to cut bread within a time frame. Contestants Mark and Nish had some really interesting choices. Mark completely savaged his bread with a grill, and Nish took forever because, well, he picked a book out of all things.
I have to say, I'm increasingly starting to understand why we're being grouped together in the way it's presented. Because when you got that grill out, I was like, this guy's a f***ing genius.
It was obvious these two were being set up to be blown out of the water. One had mush crumbs for slices, and the other, well, I still don't know what you want me to say. Nish picked a book as his best replacement for a knife. Instead, Sally and Bob in their tapes show a far more effective method, using the tension of string to replicate the slicing action. Only they misread the task and they both brought 2 items into the lab, therefore disqualifying them with 0 points each. On the other side of things, Aisling rips open a can and uses the sharp circular top compartment to make sliced bread. However, she does end up injuring herself on several occasions, causing her to repeatedly dip the bread in blood. Okay, Vlad the Impaler.
Can there be any sadder sight than a blood-covered loaf of bread in the wrong room?
The worst part of Aisling's attempt is that it probably gave her tetanus, and she completely misunderstood the task, doing it in the caravan instead of the lab, so she was also disqualified and got 0 points. And can you guess who were the only 2 contestants left with actual valid attempts? Cue the wholesome moment.
This is unprecedented.
This is our moment.
Mark gets 4 points for his second place finish, but Nish, by sheer insanity, finishes first. It just goes to show the duo of Mark and Nish were a cut above the rest. Sorry, I had to. On the topic of insanity, I'm always a big proponent of the simplest tasks being the best. In Series 7, we had Episode 9 with a Hula duel. A doula? A Hule? Well, it led to a whole deal of controversy. James and Phil were told to hula, leading to some rather odd results. Yeah, I do not need to see Phil Wang grunting like that in slow motion. In spite of supposedly never huling before, Phil does extremely well, almost lasting 1 minute. James, on the other hand, well, he doesn't do that well.
Ow! Hurts!
So if this was the task, that would be it. Phil would have beaten James thoroughly while scarring the entire audience. Except you all know by now that for this task to have made the list, it needed a twist, and oh boy, there was one. Both gents are handed a note, and they are told that between now and the studio show to improve their hula time. The most improved hula time now wins. After that time, the guys are called up onto the stage, only for them both to drop immediately. But James quickly picks up his hoop, and what he does next is shocking. To the surprise of everyone, James actually reveals he had practiced the entire time. Unfortunately for James, he gets horribly underscored due to his first attempt only counting, although all that built up anger in this episode resulted in one of the best eventual quips in Taskmaster history.
James, do you remember how I backed you on the hula hoop thing? I was right behind you.
Yeah, well, now you can back into a satsuma and shove it up your ass.
If you like disqualifications, you're going to love this task from Series 9. This was the penultimate recorded task, but in spite of being so late in the series, it absolutely delivered. Each contestant had to complete 7 tasks, but 1 task was written on each envelope, and so there were 7 envelopes on the ground, with none of the contestants knowing what they said. This meant some contestants like Rose got tasks that synergized in turn order with one another, so she largely succeeded in the tasks and overall had a positive experience. This contrasted Ed, who had a very different reaction to the order of his tasks.
That was the worst day of my f***ing life.
So far.
If I could have taken out a couple of wellies, that would have been fine. F***ing fly.
The key to the task was to begin with the closest facing envelope and go clockwise for the easiest turn order. Since Rose mostly stuck to that system, she therefore had a strong run with seemingly 0 flaws and was just outright assumed a winner by others. Katie and David were more unlucky in the order. They had to read the task, resulting in them having to hide their jigsaw only to rebuild it. Needless to say, they struggled a lot more.
Remember, if you knock over your tower, you have to start everything all over again.
I'd rather die.
So after some questionable things like David taking his hand off his hip that he thought may be located in his crotch, plus Katie's inability to put 20 things in a wheelbarrow, then on to Joe. And as you may expect, similar to David and Katie, she got a bad envelope order, which, and I'll let you be the judge of this, she didn't seem too pleased about.
Put this wheelbarrow in the caravan. Ever seen anyone have a stroke?
But once again, near the end of the task, Joe broke one of the rules by taking items out of the wheelbarrow and not starting over. Something that Ed, in all fairness, did when an item fell out of his wheelbarrow. But apparently breaking the rules didn't matter because, as Greg says, that's the spirit of the game.
I think we've got to think about the spirit here. Did everyone...
No, it's not about the spirit. It's about the... You know it's not about the spirit. You know it's...
In actuality, this was a massive ploy by Alex and Greg to wind up Ed, as all of Joe, David and Katie were disqualified, and then despite Rose smashing her task, she didn't build her tower tall enough, thus giving her 0 points. Humorously, despite it being a task Ed absolutely hated in the moment, and when watching it back, he is the only contestant to score 5 points, surpassing the competition while securing the crown. But my crown for entertainment goes to Taskmaster Series 14, which is a pretty underrated season in the franchise in my opinion. For example, episode 3 of the series contained one of the very few times I've genuinely feared for a contestant's life, as John was one bucket of sand away from being obliterated by Sleeping Beauty and an angry Irishman. With the recent success of Taskmaster New Zealand Series 2, the UK team decided to borrow some inspiration from their challenges and even their infamous Sabotage twist.
Sabotage your team in their next task. If your team loses the task, you win 5 points.
The only way for John to succeed was to fail his team, and if he was called out for sabotaging them, then he would get 0 points. It was the ultimate test, and Fern, in a weird analogy, actually puts the situation best.
And this feels like one of your relatives has been talking to the FBI about you and then just silently lifts up their t-shirt and there's a microphone pack on their body.
The task was for half of the team members to put their hands on their hips, causing both teams to centipede it as they competed to see who would get the most sand in the trolley before the time ran out. Nevertheless, John goes to town by absolutely ruining his team, like constantly lifting his hand off Fern's hip, tipping over the hat, and even when the team is about to win, he pretends to look for the envelope by knocking over more items in the trolley. Honestly, someone as adorable yet easily confused as John was the best person to be Saboteur, as some of his over-the-top lines were incredible.
Oh, hang on, watch the bucket of sand behind me.
I don't want to knock over the bucket of sand.
I have to go that way, I have to go that way, John, you have to go that way, John, you have to go that way.
Well, I don't want to knock over.
The results come in with Muna and Sarah barely winning by less than 100 grams, with John's Sabotage being the only reason they won in the end. Although perhaps one of my favourite parts of this twist is the fact that it was one of the first recorded tasks in this series, meaning Dara and Fern legitimately thought John was stupid for the next 4 months of the show. But thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, then your task is to hit that subscribe button, and peace!